today with eurythmy, and eurythmy is really it's a form of movement which sort of supports the work that we'll do later on, because certain concepts are actually much easier when you experience them, when you move them, rather than when you just hear about it. If you look at the natural world around us, you can very clearly distinguish 4 different realms. The one most visible is the physical realm, yeah, which is all the stuff, the hard stuff that you can touch and that you can feel. You can call that the mineral world or the physical world, etc. Now, when it comes to plants, you cannot explain the form of the plants based on the molecules that it's made of. Yeah? It's not the carbon and the hydrogen and the nitrogen and the oxygen that sit in the plant which determine the shape of the plant. And of course, probably most of you have noticed that there's another big difference between minerals and plants, and that's the fact that they're alive and they grow and they die at a certain point, and they sort of procreate. Now, if we look at the realm of the living, we encounter a force there which goes against the chaos. You know, if you look at a plant, if you look at an animal, if you look at a human being, you come across something which is of an order, a particular order. Yeah? And there's something there that holds the stuff together, as long as it's alive. Yeah? As long as you're alive, your body sort of is being held together and doesn't disintegrate and starts getting smelly and sort of starts rotting, not under normal conditions. Yeah, but as soon as you die, or as soon as an animal dies or a plant dies, then it's only subject to the physical forces, and it slowly, it disintegrates, tends toward chaos. Opposite those forces of, increasing chaos, we have a force that is increasing order. Yeah, and it also imbues substance with life. And life can be determined or can be described as being able to grow, being able to develop, and being able to procreate and develop more. Yeah, so if I've got a little pebble here and I've got a little seed here, outwardly they might look identical, but if I put them both in the ground and I wait 100 years, if it was a pebble, the pebble will probably slowly have disintegrated, might have broken in two, and that's all there is. Might not be anything left if you wait long enough. If I put the seed there, provided the conditions are good, the seed will germinate, it will grow into a plant or a tree, it will throw out more seeds, and after 100 years you've got a whole forest. The organism is imbued with etheric forces. You can also just call it life forces. Sometimes also we call it the formative forces. Yeah, they're all the same, or they're all different terms for basically the same sort of thing. Okay, now if we move on from plants to animals, then something else comes in. It's motion, movement,
feeling,
and feeling. That's right. So we can call that, I love that, in the English language, motion and emotion. Yeah, so movement and feeling. Yeah. In anthro-speak, we call that the astrality. Strange sort of word. And then we have the human being. The human being has something which is, again, a little bit distinct from the animals, which is that the human being has incarnated in itself the I, or the individuality. Yeah, which means that you can say, I am, whatever your name is. Yeah? You have a sense of yourself. And the physical world has been researched tremendously well. That's what materialistic, reductionistic science has been exceptionally good at. The tools with which we can research the physical world, I don't think they're the right tools to try and research the etheric world. And I don't think they're the right tools that we can use to research the world of astrality, the soul qualities. Yeah, you can use mechanistic or physical instruments to research physical objects. but you cannot necessarily use physical instruments to research something that is in a totally different dimension, in a totally different realm. Yeah, so we need to develop, and that's what we're going to try and do in this course, we need to develop our own instrument inside ourselves, yeah, which has a lot to do with our imagination and with our sense for artistic quality. It has to do with our sense of imagination when it comes to movement and rhythm and all those sort of things. I'm going to tell you now, just briefly, also because Marina already sort of, I need to talk to her, she gave things away that she shouldn't have. She was talking about warmth ether, light ether, tone ether, and she hasn't talked about life ether yet, but I'll write it down here anyway. Yeah, so the etheric forces have a close connection with the classical four elements, yeah, earth, water, air and fire. And so in this sequence, so life ether is to do with the element of earth, tone ether with the element of water, light ether with the element of air, and warmth ether with the element of fire. So the animal qualities, we have the nerve sense, which is very much to do with the thinking, what is happening within the skull. We have on the other hand our rhythmical thing, which is sort of, when you look at the skeleton, is very much connected to the rib cage and everything that happens in the rib cage, breathing, the heartbeat, etc. And we've got the metabolic limb system, metabolic, so the digestive system, and then the limbs that radiate out. Before we go actually really into this, we're going to go one level further down. Sort of one of the most fundamental qualities or polarities. For that I would like to use something from the mineral world, which Steiner talks a lot about in the agriculture lectures, and probably most of you are familiar with that, but if you're not, this is a chance to learn a little bit about that. And we use these two minerals as analogies for these two concepts. What I would like you to do is try and switch off your analytic thinking. I'm going to hand out some charcoal, try and get into your imagination and try and research these two different minerals. But if you get a handle on the essence of this particular mineral. So what would you describe the strength of the quartz? Solid. And the chalk?
It's quite dense, but quite fragile.
Quartz is transparent. And the chalk is opaque. It's almost like it might absorb water. I haven't actually tried it, but I think it probably would.
I think it dissolves in water.
Yeah, depending a bit. The water is nice and acid, like acid rain definitely has that. You know, we know that it will react with acid, it will react with water, it will react with, you know, if we have ink or whatever it is, it's reactive. And what is the opposite of that? Is quartz also reactive?
It's concentrated.
Yeah, and sort of, there's a chemical word for that, if something is not reactive.
Inert?
Yes, inert, yeah. Does every quartz crystal tend to a certain shape or not?
Triangle.
Yeah, diamond, triangle, look hard. What is it? There's two different things. The actual crystal itself has an hexagonal shape, but it also develops in a particular way. Yeah, well look, so there's two different things that we need to look at. Let's first look at the actual shape of the actual crystal. So that's sort of hexagonal in the quartz crystal. And in the chalk, as you already said, it doesn't actually have a shape of its own. Yeah, it's just amorphous is the word for that. It has no shape of itself. And that takes us to sort of the other issue, and that is how do they actually come about? Yeah, so how does chalk get formed? Does anybody happen to know?
Yes, by fresh.
Yeah, it's basically an accumulation of stuff. So it starts from something and then builds on until you've got a massive cliff of Dover kind of thing. Yeah. And how's that with the quartz actually? If you look at those geodes, these things, how do you think they were formed? So they were formed from the periphery and they grow towards the center. Yeah, so they grow from the periphery towards the center, whereas the chalk grows from a center, from a particular something, and it just accumulates, so it grows the other way around. Talking about two opposite forces. On the one hand, the force of expansion, on the other hand, the force of contraction. He used these two minerals as just giving them a name, so he calls them lime forces and silica forces. He took names of physical substances that have their application in the living world. Say the most important principle when you want to try and understand both life forces and soul qualities is the concept of, on the one hand, expansion and on the other hand, contraction. So we have the flowering plants, and we need flowering plants with a stem in order to be able to see a leaf sequence. So in a fern you don't see a leaf sequence, in a horsetail you don't see a leaf sequence. You know, all the leaves are pretty much shape-wise, they're identical. Okay, so we see something happening at the bottom, we see something happening at the top. We had a look at size. Now, I can tell you it's not just size. Yeah, the plant makes these leaves, and the way to create a good leaf sequence is to look not only at size but also to look at the shapes. So you start usually with leaves that are not the smallest by any means, but they're also not the largest. So you start with a medium leaf, medium sized, and then usually, and it depends a little bit what the species is and under which sort of conditions they grow, you get sort of 1/3, usually around 1/3 up the stem, you get the biggest leaf. The smallest leaf at the top. So how would you describe the shape of the lowest ones, and how would you describe the shape?
Round and straight.
Okay, roundish. Round and spread. And at the top?
Just linear.
Yeah, linear. Pointy. So it becomes red, or it is first a bit red, and then it goes to dark green, and then it moves up to light green in terms of colour. Petiole is long at the bottom and becomes shorter the higher up you go, and at the end you don't have any petiole at all, we've only got the leaf. The angle of the leaf slowly changes until it's almost parallel to the stem. We have a force at work which is only interested in accumulating a lot of substance and is not really bothered about any sort of form. Yeah? And on the other hand, we've got a force coming in which is actually, the stronger it gets, the least substance there is, or the less substance there is, and the more form we get, until at some point there's not enough substance left to actually manifest the form. What that actually is that you could say this from the lower part of the plant, we have a massive force coming in which tries to accumulate substance, try to manifest in the form of substance. But on the other side, working from above, we have another force working, which is interested in shape, and sort of, it's the sculptor, which takes away the substance. And the stronger the sculptor gets, the least of the material gets left over. And right in between, so the two sort of have an equal effect. That's where we get the most specific, the most beautifully formed leaves. Working in the plants are only one type of forces, which is the etheric forces. Yeah, so go back to what we talked about earlier this morning. We have these four realms of nature. We've got the physical world, we've got the etheric world, we've got the astral world, we've got the ego, the I, the world of the principles or the blueprints or the individuality. Yeah? In the human being, we have all those four principles working, all these four realms of nature working. We have a physical body, we've got a life body, we have motion and emotion, and we have an individuality. It's very difficult to entangle all that and try and get a handle on, say, tone ether, because it's sort of also imbued with all the other forces, with the soul qualities and with your own individuality. Some of your individuality comes to expression in your physical body, all the way down through all those spiritual bodies, all the way down until the physical body. Yeah, but it's not the same with plants. Now, in plants, the only spiritual force which is really coming to expression are the etheric forces. So plants are very simple beings or organisms, which consist obviously of a physical body, otherwise we wouldn't be able to see them, but also, and for the rest, only an etheric body, this life body. Now, in this life body, there are four different forces at work. We've got the warmth ether, the light ether, the tone ether, and the life ether. And what we're looking at when we look at the leaf sequence is basically an interplay between two of those forces. Yeah, on the one hand, this force that tries to create substance, and on the other hand, this force that tries to create form. Now, the special thing about this shape, I say it's round, and I'm saying round and not spherical. Yeah? A plant, the leaves of a plant are generally speaking flat. So we have two dimensions here, and we have in its most purest form a circular shape, which is sort of the type of shape that we see in leaves that float on the water. Yeah, we look at water lilies, or even the Victorian water lily, where they sort of rest on the water and they become the most perfect expression of that shape. Little changes from that shape you see in the trailing plants. Now, if you think of nasturtium, or if you think of squash, for example, pumpkins, look at the leaves, sort of very big, almost sort of roundish, lappy type of leaves, often with a stalk in the middle in the case of nasturtium. Yeah, so they have very much this. It's as if you take a dropper of water and you drop the water slowly on the table, and what you get is a perfect circle, and it just expands. It has no shape of its own. Water doesn't have a shape of its own. The shape of water, the shape of a lake, or if you pour water in a jug or whatever it is, the shape of the surface is always determined by the container into which it is. It has not a shape of its own. So we go from this, purely 2D, two-dimensional thing, length and width, flat, to something which is linear, a line. How many dimensions does a line have? One. One, yeah. Line is 1D. Just light travels just in one linear, or in a linear direction. The more light we have in plants, so if we have plants, I mean, if a plant grows in the shadow or a plant grows in full light, that will have an effect on the leaf sequence. Yeah, the leaves of a plant that grow sort of in the semi-shade are much more, this plant becomes much more pronounced. Yeah, you get bigger leaves, you get more roundish leaves, etc., etc. Yeah, whereas a plant that grows in full sun will tend much more, the leaf sequence will flip into this side of the leaf sequence much quicker. You get much more pointy leaves, and much more, if it's a thistly type of plant, the thorns become much more pronounced, the spikes become more pronounced, the leaves will get smaller more quickly, etc., etc. And you see there's even a connection with the soil. Yeah, if you've got a heavy clay or a very chalky type of soil, that type of soil, you get a leaf sequence, you get plants with bulkier leaves. If you've got a pure sandy soil, you get plants where the leaf sequence goes much quicker into this side, into the what we can call the light ether. Evolution is measured in particular what we call geologic eras. So there are certain large periods of time, vast periods of time, and, which are characterized by particular plant groups, or particular animal groups, or particular extinctions. So 3.5 billion years ago, at some point we had the first form of life, which was the blue-green algae. So an organism which is one cell big, and lives in the water, doesn't have any sort of sexual propagation, so it just clones itself, so it cuts itself in two, basically, and it has photosynthesis. They're also able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, which is quite a useful thing as well, because nitrogen, there's an enormous amount of nitrogen in the world, but it's all in the atmosphere. And it's extremely difficult to get it out of the atmosphere because nitrogen is extremely inert. For 3 billion years there wasn't really much else than just these algae. That is quite exceptional. Yeah? So there's an enormous period of time where there was life on Earth, but only in the form of these unicellular organisms that did a bit of photosynthesis. Now as a result, of course, the atmosphere did change. Yeah, because the algae were able to take up carbon dioxide and release oxygen, as plants do, as a result is photosynthesis. But at some point some of these algae started to also grow on the land, and certain adaptations had to be made in order to facilitate that. Now on the land, obviously, the main thing is that it's drier potentially on the land. There will be periods of dryness, and so the organisms that lived there had to sort of come up with a solution to survive those periods. One clever thing that came about was the development of spores. So certain inert particles, you could say, which could dry out without dying, and when the conditions were right again, they could germinate again and grow into a new organism. Another thing that was developed was what we call the cuticle, which is a waxy layer around the cell as a protection against drying out. So if you have cells that are covered in a waxy layer, you need some facility basically to still be able to exchange gas, to get the oxygen out and get the carbon dioxide in, and that is when stomata, so little pores basically developed into this waxy layer. And then in the early Devonian, that's really when first multicellular organisms appeared, and you get also the development then of short stems and sort of the beginning of roots. Now, one of the first plants to appear, like a real sort of multicellular plant with a bit of a vascular system, are the horsetails. Yeah, the horsetails, they don't have really much in terms of a root system. They've got a bit of a root. course, sort of strictly botanically speaking, these are the leaves, and the leaves sit in what we call whorls. So a whole circle of sort of linear-shaped leaves. Shortly after that, so of course 40 million years is still quite a long period, we get the first ferns coming about. And a fern is almost like a bit the opposite of a horsetail in terms of morphology. Yeah, a fern doesn't make a stem, but the fern is actually only leaves. There you go. And so on. It's just an assembly of leaves, basically. After a while you get the tree ferns as well, so this leads and tree horsetails, or very giant horsetails. So what you actually see is that these plants, they become incredibly successful and become often quite enormous or in geological time, but then at some point they disappear, or most of them disappear. We still got some ferns, we still got some horsetails, and they're really the last remnants of a much more diverse population, or a much more diverse assembly of different species and families and so on. Then in the Carboniferous, we see that these two principles are slowly being put together. So we get, on the one hand, stems, and on the other hand, sort of leaves attached to it. And we also see that the root system starts to develop a little bit further. There's usually, what they say, a common ancestor. So we've got first the horsetail developing, and then from a common ancestor we have the ferns developing and becoming very big and very successful, and then from a common ancestor we have the first, you could say, trees developing, so where you get the principle of stem and principle of leaf being put together into one plant. Ferns did not develop from horsetails, and horsetail, well, I suppose they did develop from the blue-green algae ultimately, but the next one, the trees, did not develop from the horsetails or the ferns, or a cross between a horsetail and a fern. That is, you can't sort of make that sort of assumptions at all. It developed from something which was still sort of very malleable, sort of very changeable, and then developed into something. And when something develops in evolutionary terms, becomes very good and very successful into something, very specialized into something, then it reaches its summit, its best, its top, and then often it dies out. And then the next step in evolution is development of seeds. That means we need, in order to be able to get seeds, we need pollen and we need egg cells, ovules. So basically the whole way how spores were being produced, that sort of slightly changed, and it turned into sort of two different things. On one hand, a mechanism through which egg cells were produced, and another mechanism through which pollen was being produced. So we go from stem, and then leaf, and leaf and stem, living alongside each other, to an organism that combines the two. And then you have that with the fertilization taking place outside the plant, away from the plant, and that is then being brought also onto that structure. Okay, now the seed-bearing plants that we are more familiar with are the conifers. So the conifers, strictly speaking, botanically speaking, are not, they don't create flowers. Yeah, so the structures on the conifers, on the pine trees and the redwoods and those sort of things, larches, spruce, they're not botanically called flowers, but they're reproductive structures, but they are just basically scaly leaves sort of arranged together. So pine cone in reality is not a fruit, but it's just scaly leaves put together. Within there, relatively unprotected, are the egg cells. So the egg cell is not enclosed by a structure, by a fruit as such. And we call these the gymnosperms. So sperm has to do with seed here, refers to seed, and gymno means naked. So these are the plants which have the naked seeds, seeds which are not enclosed by a vessel or a fruit. The most recent development during the Cretaceous period is the development of the flower. If you compare a pine cone with the very early flowers, is that you have, in a pine cone, you've got all these scaly leaves, and within those scaly leaves you've got the ovules, the eggs, sitting there waiting to be pollinated. And then if you look at the flower of the magnolia, you see that it consists of a spiral arrangement of ovaries, also in this spiral shape. So very much along the same form principle as the pine cone. Yeah, but then of course we've got flowers around it, and we've got the actual ovary then obviously develops into a fruit. Here we see then also pistil, the style with the stigma, together called pistil. So the pollen lands on the stigma, then has the ability to grow through the style, and then from below pollinates the ovules so that they then turn into a seed. So this process of fertilization, which was with the horsetails and with the ferns, was totally outside the plant, totally given over to the natural, the natural world, or just purely nature. First got sort of semi-internalized in the conifers, where it was sort of a little bit protected by these scaly leaves, but the actual ovules are still naked, they're not enclosed into anything. And then the next step is that the whole thing gets enclosed and gets sort of internalized into a spherical, usually spherical structure, into a fruit. Absolutely not Okay, so what we're going to do is take these the petals off the tulip, one after the other. And so you've got three that sit really on the outside. So we take off those first. 1, 2, 3. So you have to keep turning the flower in order to get the next one. So the normal number of petals in a tulip is 3 sepals, then 3 petals, and then 6 stamens. They're all multiples of 3. That's sort of quite different than, for example, the rose family. The rose family, everything is in multiples of 5, exactly. So if you look at the spiral arrangement of the flower in a tulip, you probably notice it's not just you need to not move a little bit, no, you need to move the stem quite a bit until you get to the next big petal. And then you need to move the stem quite a bit until you get to the next big petal. So it's roughly sort of a triangular, but like everything in nature is messy, which is the beauty of nature, is that it isn't perfect, which is what allows for mutations, for creativity, for change to come about. Okay, so it goes from big to small, to actually microscopic, doesn't it? You know what happened with your fingers? My fingers turned yellow at the end. Now there was something created here that was so small that it was just like a bit of dust in my finger, on my fingers. It's quite interesting. Plants don't, we said this morning, plants don't travel, they can't move. But here the plant actually creates something, an organ, whose purpose it is to travel. Insects have been around for a lot longer than mammals, and there has been more of a co-evolution. The other thing is that insects seem to be much more closely connected to plants than mammals. Mammals have a lot more internalized and have detached themselves much more from the world of the etherics and the world of the plants. Whereas the insects, they don't, for example, have their own warmth body, and they have just a totally different connection to the plant world. Much more than half of all the animal species are insect species, like 60 or 70 or 80%. And of the insect species, a huge number of those are beetles. So there are more species of beetles than there are any other species of any other animal all taken together. So all the mammals, all the birds, all the fish, all the other animals together, all the different species, is less than the number of beetle species that are around. I'm sure you're all familiar with these little critters called silverfish. Yeah, they're sort of very small, totally harmless. They feed on dust and dead cells and basically sort of cleaners. So they do lay eggs, but then what they call the instars are the non-adult phases. So what defines an insect, or what is very specific about an insect, is a bit like what we were talking about yesterday when we were talking about the head. Yeah? In the mammal, where we have the hard stuff on the outside and the soft stuff on the inside. Now, in mammals, we then have another section where we have the rib cage, where it's sort of in and out, and there's a rhythm there. And then we have most of our body, which is the extremities, where we have the soft stuff on the outside and the hard stuff on the inside. Insects don't work like that. Insects have a hard skin on the outside, which cannot expand. When the insect eats, it needs to expand, but the hard skin cannot expand, so it needs to molt, and it basically means it sheds, it gets out of this hard skin, then has to increase in size very, very quickly until the next skin hardens again. So the growth goes in stages. The other type of insect, sort of in-between type, are what we call the hemimetabolous insects. So they're sort of in between. So they don't have so they're sort of semi-metamorphism. As you can see, the larva doesn't look very much like the adult, but after every molt, it looks a little bit more like the adult. Of course, like all insects, they do lay eggs. At that stage, always eggs, and then several what they call instars, which slowly, gradually become more and more like the adult. Only the adult is sexually reproductive, and usually only the adult has wings if it is a winged insect, which most insects are. And then, of course, we've got the insects that go through a complete metamorphosis. And it's not just the caterpillars and butterfly, it's also things like bees and wasps, ants, and all the beetles. And there you have a phase. You've got the egg, then you've got the larvae. Usually the larvae also molts, and then often there's a pupa stage, so a sort of dormant phase, you could say. And the interesting thing is, during that phase, it's not like certain organs stay the same. Like all the internal organs, as well as all the external organs, turn into some sort of soup, and then out of that soup, the new organism is being formed. All insects have, as you probably remember from biology classes, 6 legs, so 3 pairs of legs, which all attach to what they call the thorax, which is the middle part of the insect. So the insect always consists of 3 quite distinct parts. You've got the head, where you've got the eyes, so usually antenna and some sort of mouth parts. Then you've got the thorax, the abdomen. So this is manifested in numerous different forms. Yeah, especially the thorax. So the dark bit is the thorax. So a wasp will look different. A beetle has a different thorax. A dragonfly, very small thorax. And then this is some sort of cicada, where the thorax is completely transformed into a massive big shield. The way the insects are being formed relates very much to where in the world of nature where they live. Yeah, so beetles, for example, and also on what they feed. So beetles, for example, tend to live sort of at ground level or underground. The larvae are usually underground, or they live in wood. Yeah, if you have this enormous amount of what you call it, like woodworm beetles. So they feed on very difficult to digest material. Of course, when we think of butterflies, we think of the butterfly, but the thing that actually eats most is the caterpillar, which is a different organism. Yeah, so the butterfly or the caterpillar very much lives in the leafy area. The eggs are being laid on a leaf. The caterpillar feeds on the leaves, and then usually the pupa hangs from a leaf, or from a branch, and then the insect goes out, the butterfly goes out. All insects are very much sort of more than mammals, reflecting, or reflecting is perhaps the best word, their surroundings in their colours, not only in their colours, also in their structure. If you think of the beetles in the ground, we've got the hard bits and the hard structure, often relatively dark colours. That sort of picture do you get. When you go up in the sky, and this is interesting, this was done in the rainforest. In the lower strata in the rainforest, sort of closest to the ground, there's not a lot of light coming through. So the butterflies that tend to live in that sort of stratum generally don't tend to have a lot of colour, so they're more like black and white. And the interesting thing is, the same applies to the birds that live in that same area. And then as you go higher up, you get the orange and yellow, and then it moves on to the red, and then highest up it turns to the blue. There is a relationship here with the etheric forces, because you see a very similar thing with plants and with flowers, especially with the colours of flowers. It's quite interesting to try and look at insects as in their form and in their colour, and perhaps even in their behaviour, as being a manifestation of a higher principle. Yeah, sometimes, I don't know if this is from Steiner, I suppose it is, which says substance is condensed spirit. Yeah? And then spirit, I don't mean sort of a high, particular God necessarily, but you have a certain particular impulse which then condenses into substance. The plant is like a live wire between two poles of a battery. Yeah, and on the one hand, you could say you could sort of consider the plant, at work at the lowest end of the plant, the tone ether, which is to do with water, the element water. And on the other hand, you said we've got the element of light, the light ether working. Can consider the flower as a result of the tension between, again, two etheric forces. On the one hand, light ether, so the light ether works here from below, which comes to expression then very much in the colours of the petals and sort of line shapes in the flower. And then on the other hand, we said there's the warmth ether. We have two etheric forces working here which are not terribly interested in substance. They carve something out into very thin, a very ephemeral substance, which then also fades away very, very quickly. Hasn't a lasting capacity. But then, right in the middle there, something comes about which is totally different. Yeah, which has the capacity to last for decades. And has, where the substances previously made in the flower, very volatile, nicely scented, very sweet, or very short carbon chains, if you look at it chemically, so you analyze the chemical substances. Then, suddenly, if you think of a coconut, suddenly, or a walnut, or a hazelnut, you have something developing there, which is again totally counterintuitive. And the other thing is, it's no longer flat. That's interesting as well. Suddenly we get some actually quite often spherical objects. In the case of the leaf sequence, we could take them off, we could put them one next to the other. The flower, the time space became shorter, but there is a moment where you can take all the leaves off and put them next to each other. With the fruit, that's harder. It's more something that tends to develop over time. Yeah, it goes from something very small, and it isn't then a sequence. You haven't got the small cherry, and then a slightly bigger cherry, and a slightly bigger cherry, and then a massive big cherry, and then an enormous cherry. So you don't have that. It develops from a tiny little cherry, but the cherry just becomes bigger, 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 or the walnut, or the hazelnut, or whatever the case may be. Inside you have the seed, and the seed has an extremely hard seed coat. What sort of substance do you think that is? What does it actually relate to? What is the similarity in the rest of the plant world? I mean?
To the wood?
Yeah, to the wood, yeah, exactly. Now this is bizarre, isn't it? You know, something which normally, if you remember this tree here, you know, we just established this stuff here in the middle actually has a resemblance here to the physical substance. And of course also, if you think of the seed, the actual shell around it is not alive anymore. Now that is dead matter, very hard, very solid and spherical. That's quite unusual. And of course we're not only looking at nuts, but we're also looking at pulses. Beans and peas, you know, they're all seeds, and grains, they're all seeds. So we need to sort of widen our gaze a little bit and include all the other seeds as well. That's interesting, because earlier on in the plant, in the flower, we also had a type of oil. Yeah, we have the essential oils. Are these also essential oils? No, they're not essential oils. So inside the seed, so if you have an olive, or if you have a sunflower, or if you've got a rapeseed plant, what is it for sort of oil that's inside there? Or if you have a linseed plant?
Well, it's all edible, isn't it?
Yeah, they're edible oils.
Yeah,
Yeah. They're not essential, we don't call them essential oils because they're not volatile. So if I put a drop of rose oil here, and I put a drop of sunflower oil here. Now the rose oil is the essential oil from the actual flower, but the sunflower oil is this oil that we extract from the seed. The rose oil will sort of evaporate. You know, you come in through the front door and immediately you think, ah, what's going on here? But with the sunflower, you know, the drop will just stay here. That's a heavy oil. Yeah? However, we both call them oils, and both of them are actually flammable. Yeah, the volatile oil, very volatile. Yeah, so you put it in an atomizer and you get a nice big flame. You couldn't do the same thing with the sunflower oil, but you could make a very nice torch, or you could put sunflower oil in an oil lamp, for example. And it's interesting, even in nutrition, we use those oils often to fry things, yeah, to make things hot and warming, and it even has a sort of warming effect on ourselves. There's a lot more oil being consumed in the colder climates than in the tropics. Okay, so what defines oils is this connection to warmth, or to heat, or in this case, if we go to the living, the world, the realm of the living, we're talking about warmth ether. Yeah, so we have a substance here that on the one hand carries the signature of warmth, but on the other hand also carries the signature of something that is heavy. Surrounded by something, or encapsulated into something that is extremely, heavy, very much subject to gravity, etc. So it's very interesting. We have something here which we call life ether. Life ether is the etheric force that has very much to do with the three dimensions, with the substance, and also, interestingly, which sort of it transcends time. As soon as the plant is doing this leaf sequence, or the flower sequence, or those sort of things, it is in a cycle of time which cannot be stopped. Yeah, the plant cannot think sort of halfway here, conditions aren't so good, or it's not brilliant here, I'll stop, I'll just go dormant. Plants don't do that. But after that, it drops out of the cycle of time, or out of the immediate cycle of time. Yeah, because in the seed, The plant is in a state where it transcends the ordinary cycles of time. Yeah, we have seeds that we have germinated after 100 years, after 1,000 years. Yeah, life ether and total ether are both subject to gravity. Whereas warmth ether and light ether, just as light and warmth, they have no connection to gravity. They actually cause levity. The seed physically, of course, at some point pops out of that flower, or what used to be a flower, and then drops to the ground. And there it can lay dormant for years and years and decades, sort of out of the cycle of time. Because as soon as you get moisture in, yeah, as soon as the tone ether comes in, that's when it comes out of the cycle, of this permanent cycle, this long cycle of time. And it enters the actual cycle of time, the life cycle. Now, the first thing that a germinating seedling does, what is it? What is the first organ that's being formed?
Root.
It's always the root. No matter which plant, it's always the root. Yeah, so we have life ether there, and we have tone ether, both of which are subject to gravity. And the first organ that the plant creates is an organ that doesn't grow up, but is an organ that grows down. Yeah, and then after a few days, of course, then light becomes important, and we get the first cotyledons coming up, and then light, and and then the whole cycle starts again. So the whole plant, the whole growth of the plant, sort of can be interpreted as, in its various stages, as tensions between these. Every time two pairs, not one pair, two of the ethers, where there is a tension. So tone ether and light ether in the leaf sequence, light ether and warmth ether in the flower, warmth ether and life ether, which is more sort of a concentrating sort of thing in the seed and the fruit, and then in the formation of the root, you've got the tone ether and the life ether. When the mammals and the insects split apart, somewhere around that time, there also came about a difference in the embryology. So you've got a clump of cells, and then very early on in embryology, there's that hollow makes then another opening on the other side, and the one is your mouth, and the other is your anus. Yeah, and the funny thing is, with the insects, the first opening that occurs develops then into the mouth, and the anus comes at the other end, so the anus comes secondary. But we first develop our anus, and only later we develop our mouth. If you look down to your belly, you've got a navel, or a belly button. Yeah, this is where you were connected to your mum that feeds you, and we have our spine opposite that. Insects develop exactly the other way around. Yeah, so they are connected by their back, and what is our spine develops at the front. Seen from the perspective from a mammal, an insect is sort of a flipped out, and sort of as if it's in its development, sort of flipped out, the wrong way around. Like lots of things are the other way around in insects. But they have the mouth, we have the anus. But they have the anus, we have the mouth. So it's like you have it sort of all sort of twisted and sort of flipped inside out. But we have our internal skeleton, they have an external skeleton. But they develop, where we develop from the navel side, from the front side, they've developed from the back side. Yeah, we have our warmth internalized. We create our own warmth. We make sure that our body, and so do birds, and so do all the other mammals, we create our own internal warmth. Insects can't do that. They shape their body in accordance to the outside world when it comes to color, when it comes to the whole way how they look, how the different organs are being formed, etc. Yeah, so they're really quite different. In that sense, that's how I come to this conclusion. In a certain sense, insects are much closer to plants than mammals and birds are to plants. The plants and the insects they're from the same origin. Yeah, and depending on where this seed, this common seed of the insect slash plant, the plinsect or the plant-sect, where that seed was, whether it was above ground or below ground, in the above ground sphere or in the below ground sphere, so in the earthly, subject to the earthly forces or subject to the cosmic forces, depending on that, it developed sort of in parallel, the one into an insect and the other into a plant. So I put that in a picture where you have sort of this common seed, or which can be either, subject to the cosmic forces above ground or subject to the earthly forces below ground developing. And it's so interesting that you can actually see the different stages reflected in, for example, if you think of the molting of the juvenile insect, you have a similar sort of rhythm in the rhythm of the leaves. Yeah, so you've got a seed and an egg, you've got a germinating seedling and a larvae, often, not always, but often living in that same sort of area. Then you've got the leaf, you've got the juvenile stages of the insect, where you have a mold and a mold and a mold and growth, growth, growth. And then you've got this stage here, where you've got the flower bud. There is something totally new and totally different is happening, where in fact a metamorphosis takes place, which I think can be analogous to the chrysalis. And then comes out, you get the flower, you've got the butterfly, and of course then after the butterfly there's the eggs, and the flower makes the seeds, and so the whole cycle is complete again. I'm going to give you a card about one of the insects. And what I would like you to do is sort of try and use this picture, use what we've learned today especially and yesterday, and see how does it work if you apply that to this particular insect.
Which one?
I think it's growing in wood piece, and so that the eggs are laid in the piece of wood, and so it's an earthly insect, and connected to life ether, and then it grows and becomes this brown color, which is like earth, and it stays on the earth, I would say. So it's tone ether, life earth ether.
Very much connected to the lower regions, to life ether, tone ether, and this case specialized in trees and furniture.
The dragonfly is close to the water. I always see close to the swamp, and like the eggs can be related with the water, and then the nymph is really brown color and is probably eating eggs, insect or whatever from the earth. And then when the adult came, is kind of searching the light because of the color. They are usually so bright.
I think the life force of the
It's going up.
going up from the water, earth, and the air.
I think with these sort of predatory insects, they obviously don't have a direct connection to the plant world, because they're not eating plants, they're eating other insects and apparently even small tiny fish, sort of when they're in the juvenile stage. So they're really ferocious predators, and one would have to really think about it. It seems like of all the insects, they're getting mostly away from the etheric forces, in totality. And I go more towards the astral forces.
The wasp mainly with the flower stage, mainly because of the strong colors it has, and
related to the light and warmth.
Because also they come out mainly during the summer, and then something else we took is the way they sting, and they bite, and thinking about what sort of flower or plant we relate it more to do with like a nettle.
You don't see many wasps on the flowers. They go for the fruits actually. And so they go one stage further. And then if you think of the actual wasp's nest, there's also very often it's a complete, perfect sphere, almost like a fruit, same sort of shape. Which I think is interesting. Not like bees. These nests are totally different, but it's funny. And it's very interesting what you said about the sting and the connection that you make to the nettle. As far as I know, it's definitely true for the ants. So the sting poison that the ant gives is exactly the same sort of poison that the stinging nettle gives. It's called formic acid. Yeah, and I think it's the same that the wasps have as well. Probably the bees as well. But I'm not 100% sure.
The color that's white is kind of lack of light and light ether in this case. Not all the colors of the other stage are brownish, so we just deduce that probably is related to the light ether again.
It seems to us that it has the same kind of mouth, which is a mandibula, that make us think that it ever eats plants, or I don't know whether leaves or wooden parts, but it has the same kind of alimentation. But here, with earthy forces, and here, high in the plant, there are some little points. The elytras are brown, and the points are white, and they are like a remembrance of that brown points it had as a larva. And that's important, but because in many insects you can find a sign of their origin,
The ladybird, where you can see that, for example. We all know the ladybird as the adult, the lovely orange bark with the black spots. But then if you look at the larva, it's sort of the other way around. It's sort of black with some orange spots. And then the pupa stage is sort of in between. It's already orange, it's black spots, but it's not actually looking yet like the adult. So.
And we have the leaf cutting ant. So at the bottom we have their cities, their communities, communes, rather like the bees. And actually this picture, it does show it looking rather like a root and seeds. And I think the majority of them live under the ground, but they do send out foraging parties. And so we have the earthly forces most of the time, but the foraging parties are going up the trees, cutting the leaves, dropping them down, and then they sort of procession them back into the cities. And these different rooms are nurseries and farms and living accommodation and accommodation for the queen. So they're bringing the light, they're bringing the tone, ether, into the earthly forces.
That's a good one. I haven't actually really deeply thought about it. They're the oldest farmers, because they don't actually eat the leaves. They take the leaves, as you can see in that picture, take it underground, and they culture a fungus there, and they eat the fungus, actually. And you would have to do some serious linking that all together, they eat the fungus, they use these, they have this formic acid, and it's not such an easy one to wrap your head around it in terms of what is the relationship to the etheric force.
We've got orchids and a wasp feeding off the orchid, and at the bits of flower we're looking at warmth and light ether, the cosmic forces, as well as the colour of the orchid's beautiful purple and pinky colour. There's also the picture of the wasp. Interestingly, the wasp is quite a dark colour, where we would perhaps expect it to be more brightly coloured because of its activity and the fact that orchids often do live up in the trees, but this one seems to be perhaps more in grassland.
So the fact that it's lacking the beautiful colours is maybe that it's more related to the warmth eater than the other wasps, maybe, I don't know. Because it's quite fine and kind of less substance.
So with wasps, when we think of wasps, we usually think of the wasps that you were talking about, the ones that build colonies and that live together and that are, sort of stinging us all the time. But there are thousands of wasps of different types and different species of wasps which live solitary and have sometimes a different, often predate on just one insect, for example, on one other animal. We use a lot of those predatory wasps in greenhouses. They're being introduced in order to predate our pests, basically to eliminate our pests in the greenhouse. Now, when the warmth ether becomes stronger, that is, I think you're right, that the colour then sort of disappears. It's much more a light ether. When the warmth ether comes in, it becomes more like a bee, basically. A bee being very much an insect that is totally under the influence of warmth ether more than anything else. Thank you, everybody. It's the end of the course. So thank you for your attention and your input, your presence, and I hope it was helpful. Thanks a lot. Thank you.